again, this is going to be company specific, whether or not you can just go select a specific vendor or if you have to look for competitive bids or different, different things. So in part of that process, we had to do our due diligence on each of the vendors. So as I said, we were looking for, and we were fresh, we didn't have a privacy compliance tool that we were using. But had there been an existing vendor, it was something that we could have taken into consideration. And that might be the case in some of your organizations. But you have to think about what information is this new vendor going to access, right? So data being of key importance. Is it sensitive data? Is it your employee data? What kind of data is it? And you have to evaluate the security and safeguarding that each of the vendors has in place. So we're talking about the vendor management program in general. It's certainly cross-functional. It's not necessarily just the buyer of any tool. It's not necessarily, if you have a procurement legal department or your privacy legal department, your security department, there are many steps in the process. So you all have to work together in evaluating any vendor that you all might be looking at.
And, we really want to, when doing due diligence, want to kind of push past the initial layer. I feel like sometimes, a lot of times you'll get an answer and then you kind of need to make sure the kind of answers are fulsome. Because, for example, I was working with a client once, they were doing due diligence on a vendor. I believe they were sending discount codes out, and that involved an API connecting the vendor back to the client's systems so that they could identify who was a member of their rewards program and who wasn't. And looking at that, trying to figure out what data was actually going back and forth, and then I believe finding that a lot more data was going to the vendor than was actually required. All that you needed was someone to put the rewards program number in to make a match back to the CRM that sends it back. But they were actually sending a lot more of the customer information, or they would have been if we hadn't been doing our due diligence. And so making sure you're not only understanding what data is going back and forth, but how that can be limited where necessary. And if it can't be limited, if it needs to actually move back and forth, and how it can be protected if maybe a little more makes sense. So we want to always manage what information is flowing and then make sure the security settings match that, right? If all you're sending is a rewards number or confirmation of a rewards number, the risk is a lot lower than if you're sending customers' full contact information to the vendor and the vendor is keeping that on file. And so the due diligence levels should at least match the level of what data is being shared with the vendor and how the vendor is going to be managing that data and what they're going to be doing with it. Because sometimes we just look at the high level, and that's not necessarily the same as when you poke around underneath the hood.
And I would say too, specifically with regards to this portion, it's truly a conversation between legal and security because, you all might be on the phone, maybe legal with their attorneys talking about this, but, your security team might not be on the call. So this one is an area where there really does need to be cross collaboration between the teams in order to make sure you get it right, right? That the security matches the need.